Today is October 21, 2025. When Donald Trump issued a national security document called NSPM-7 in late September 2025, he called it a measure to fight domestic terrorism and organized political violence. On paper, it sounds like a national security document, something to prevent violent extremism. But buried in the language was a dangerous shift. It named, quote, extremism on migration, race, and gender as targets, and it spoke about defending, quote, traditional American views on family, religion, and morality. Those words open a wide door to surveillance and punishment that go far beyond actual acts of violence. They create a framework where ideology, identity, and culture can be treated as threats to the state. The memo directs the FBI, the Justice Department, and the Treasury to trace, prosecute, and disrupt individuals, groups, and even tax-exempt organizations that fall under its definition of domestic terrorism. It allows the government to revoke nonprofit status and cut off funding if officials believe an organization is aiding or abetting political violence. Legal experts are warning that this language is dangerously vague. It does not define what extremism on gender even means. It simply assumes that gender can be a site of radicalization and that defending non-traditional identities could be cast as extremism. That is why specifically Indigenous and Two-Spirit communities are alarmed. Across Native nations, gender diversity is not a political position or a social experiment. It is sacred. The identity of Two-Spirit people, those who carry both masculine and feminine spirits, is woven through ceremony, storytelling, and the spiritual life of tribes. These identities predate the existence of the United States. Yet under NSPM 7, a government investigator could look at those traditions and see something that challenges traditional American views on family. The memo's words invite interpretation through a narrow Christian nationalist lens, and that lens can easily cast indigenous spirituality as a threat. Now, imagine a Two-Spirit gathering organized by a tribal nonprofit, and we have many here in Chicago. The event includes teaching about gender balance and sacred roles. Now imagine a federal agent or political actor looking at that event and calling it gender extremism. If that group receives a grant, the Treasury could trace its funds or question whether it aids movements that challenge traditional morality. It sounds absurd, but it only takes one official on the ground, not a director, not a supervisor, just one guy on the street with the job, reading the memo literally to open an investigation. History shows how easily indigenous expression has been policed. The boarding school era, the ban on the Sundance, and the surveillance of Native activists all followed the same pattern. What is different now is that gender itself could be treated as a potential crime scene. Indigenous sovereignty does not guarantee protection here. NSPM 7 empowers federal agencies to act under the logic of counterterrorism, which means they can bypass the cultural and legal autonomy of tribes in the name of national security. The moment the government ties ideology to violence, sovereignty becomes fragile. The memo's phrase about defending traditional American morality is a political statement, not a legal definition. For Native people whose traditions differ fundamentally from European American ones, that phrase can be used to disqualify their beliefs from protection. Now, the risks go beyond surveillance. The memo explicitly mentions financial tracking and nonprofit accountability. Many tribal and Two-Spirit organizations depend on charitable funding. If any agency decides that an advocacy program promoting gender-diverse spirituality is politically radical, it could threaten their funding or revoke their nonprofit status. This creates a chilling effect where indigenous groups will self-censor or avoid certain cultural expressions for fear of being branded extremist for funding that they need to survive as a whole. Even without prosecutions, the fear of investigation is enough to silence them. There is also a deeper moral danger. NSPM 7 presents itself as a security document, but it carries the seeds of cultural control. It defines traditional America in a way that excludes indigenous and gender diverse experiences. It rewrites who counts as truly American. The indigenous understanding of balance, community, and identity becomes suspect because it does not conform to a nationalist ideal. In that sense, this is not only about policy, but it's about erasure. The story of indigenous people in America has always included state attempts to discipline bodies, beliefs, and ceremonies. What makes this moment different is that the label of terrorism can now be placed on gender identity itself. If gender can be named as a form of extremism, then anyone living outside the binary could be treated as a potential threat. That is not just a legal problem, but a spiritual crisis. It is a return to the colonial project, get that, a return to colonialism that sought to erase indigenous identities and call it civilization. The truth is that NSPM 7 will not make the country safer. It will make it smaller. It will shrink the space for difference, creativity, and sacred identity. For Indigenous and Two-Spirit people who have survived centuries of suppression, this memo feels like a familiar echo of past violence, now dressed in the language of security. If the state defines morality narrowly enough, it can turn diversity itself into a crime. That is why the fight against this policy is not only political, but moral. It is about protecting the right of every culture to define its own sacred balance and to live without being called a terrorist for doing so.